Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Let me see what I have. I have Caroline in the house. I've got words. Shout out to you guys. Murica, how you doing? Grandma, dirty bitch, how you doing, love? Shout out to you, Lori. How are you guys? All right, everybody. T Marie, welcome. Welcome. Miss O, how you doing, love? How are you doing? How are you doing? Oh, is it? Well, I'm an early morning type of person. I tend to do three. I try to do three lives a day, but just really depends on my schedule and baby bunny and whatnot. Liz, chaos, welcome everybody. Tricky, Vicky, thank you for being here. Wim, how you doing, love? Everybody come through. Shout out to everybody. Shout out to everybody. Now, Chico, how you doing? Hope you're doing well. As I'm getting situated here. I want to shout everybody out because we're going to get into some stuff. I have been in this mental rabbit hole with this whole Lima, Amanda Rab, and all the moving parts to this. And I want to thank BJ and her, first of all, her shout out. Thank you so much, BJ. Her opportunity to use some of her content and give commentary, and her opportunity for just the overall, the fact that she's just available to answer questions and whatnot. Shout out to her, and shout out to the supporters that she receives, because everybody came through and was really, I mean, she's got a huge supporter network that are really asking for people to bring attention to this, and I'm here for it. You know what I'm saying? It's just it's great to see that. It's great to see the many supporters that are out there. Yes, thank you so much. Hey Tinkle, how you doing, love? And then I have Trust No One. And who else is in here? Did I miss? Vamp, Diva, thank you so much for the 5. Thank you, love. I appreciate you. So we're really going to go into it. And let me tell you something. I have been watching this and rewatching it and rewatching it and rewatching it. Now, a lot of you guys were like, Rabbit, I really don't understand what is the big deal with this. Who is this girl? What does she do? And I said, if I have to, I'm going to explain it to you every time I go live, because there is a good portion of you guys that are members of mine or subscribers that said, I just don't understand what the issue is here. And I feel like it's always good to kind of explain things. Just a quick little summary, right? This woman right here who is sitting in a chair, and it's a little bit blurry because this was an interview that I took from the Soft White Underbelly channel, which is about over 4 million subs, right? That channel is run by a gentleman by the name of Mark Leda. Okay. This specific woman right here, she has a company, and basically it's the merging. Her company is the merging of mental health treatment with virtual reality. Okay. Now, when I first heard the story, like I've said it before, I was very confused because I didn't really understand. Well, how is it affecting everybody? Is this like a celebrity thing? No, it's affecting everybody. It definitely has a potential of being very damaging. And I wanted to really dive into that, at least in the preventative side of things, as far as me bringing some awareness to like mental health issues, the things that we need to be aware of. Now, she did an interview with Mark Leda, Soft White Underbelly, and I pulled some of that interview. I sped it up, I tweaked it, I made like crazy edits to it to ensure that we wouldn't be struck. I don't think Mr. Leda really gives a crap about us little channels over here. And I mean, I don't know. I just never really. He's got 4 million, and he's a businessman, right? What is so interesting about Mr. Leda is that he understands the business of what he does, right? He is a photographer that essentially brings people that are struggling with mental illness or substance abuse or some other thing or tragedy or trauma, and interviews them and does these pieces. And ideally, I'm here for it, right? Like ideally, I'd be the one to say, yeah, whatever. I guess for me is ideally, if it's like a preventative method or an informative method or a scare straight method, and those are methods that you kind of have to weigh in. Well, what is the purpose behind what is happening? But he understands that if you bring in a drug addicted prostitute to do an interview, especially if she's, you know, shaking, doesn't have a lot of clothes on, um, the story is more tragic. He understands that the business, that's going to bring him views, right? He further slaps onto his intros and outros the agencies that support him and or work with them. Some of them being like human trafficking. Some, some interesting agencies that I'm like, let me look at. At some point, I like to look into them to understand how are those endorsements? Are those just agencies, nonprofits? Who are these agencies, right? This is a money making business. All right. Let's be real. We are content creators. He's a bigger content creator than a lot of us. So he understands that this is a money making business and that a lot of us are moved. We are people that care. I care. Y'all care. I care, right? We are people that care about people, especially if you're in the true crime sector. You guys know we care about people. That's how we care. And so he understands that. And a lot of what he presents is an appeal to the audience. We care about the stories that are out there. And I was looking, especially when I was watching Amanda Rabb's story, and then there's other ones in there. I was thinking in my mind, like, damn, like he is trying to present them as they are. And ideally, I get it, but I also feel like he knows that some of these people's life expectancy, if they continue on to doing what they're doing, is very small. If you're worried about when you're going to get your next hit, you really going to care about whether there's a YouTube video out there about you where you're not even clothed all the way, you're looking kind of disheveled. Let's just be real. If you can hardly feed yourself because this is your focus right now, if it's drugs or if there's this mental illness or whatever it may be, do you honestly think that somebody's going to care about there being a YouTube video about them out there? I don't know what releases they sign or if they even sign a release. Sometimes it's not even about that. I was watching some other channels that do film a lot of the homeless, and I initially thought when I was watching some of those, it was to bring awareness to the homeless population. And that you would have to wonder because it's kind of like the crazier the story, the better the views. And I'm not lying. You just have to do a compare and contrast of those views versus the other views, right? I also feel like it's important to put this in perspective. Um, a lot of us monetize that tell stories about people, monetize on tragedy. As a social worker, I chose the profession that is going to, like, somebody's tragedy is going to pay me, right? And although I pride myself in being very ethical about things, I have to check myself to make sure that I don't also overstep, right? Those are things that we have to kind of keep in balance. I'm sure that Miss BJ, who is an attorney, or she has her law, she thought about these things as well. Of like, do I use my license or my profession to exploit others, or how do I use it to help others and project that message? And that is just a little soapbox. Right. How do you sign releases if you're high? How can you consent if you're high? How do you consent to treatment if you're high? Those are things that you have to kind of keep in mind, right? Do they know exactly? Thank you for saying that. Do they know what they're doing, right? And somebody who's in the mental health field, shoot, even an attorney would know that there's an issue with that ethically, right? To expose somebody out there like that. If I ran a channel where I expose the most vulnerable of Skid Row, I'm guaranteed views. I'm definitely guaranteed a check. I'm definitely guaranteed a story because I can come up with some crazy stories about what to put out there. So, although a lot of people are, and there were in my comments too, we support Mark is doing a great job. He's bringing awareness. Okay. Okay. Because you need a YouTube channel to do that. You can't just drive down to your local homeless shelter to see that you have a homeless problem, that there's an issue there. Okay. Anyways, just lets us know how disconnected we can be from life sometimes. Um, that's a great question. Who's to say that there is? Who's to say that there is any consent, right? We don't know. I wanted to review this video, right? Because I wanted to understand who Lima is. Now, of course, we just talked about Mark and the White Underbelly channel. So Mark does an interview with Lima, and I believe the date, I think it was like mid-COVID. I have to go back on that timestamp, right? And or that date. And when I'm looking at this interview, because I really wanted to understand who this girl is, what, like, I started looking into a little bit more of her, who she is as a person. What is her motivation? What is her drive? A lot of us could probably relate to this. Trauma usually drives us to make career decisions. I'm one of them, right? I'll say that very loudly. I'm one of them. Experiences usually take us to make career decisions. I'm one of them. So I was like, maybe there's more to this. This interview right here really, I was really perplexed by it, like deeply. We're gonna watch it. I did do some edits to it. It is not perfectly edited. It's just put up there, and I'm gonna put my little fair use banner just to protect myself from anybody trying to report or anything like that. I'm gonna do this one right here. Let's see, this one right here. Yeah, let's do that one right there. Okay, let's watch it, and I'm gonna commentate, and we will go from there. All right, you guys let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you've never seen this before and this is your first time, again, this is Lima. She runs the virtual mental health company, Aura. She's got other projects as well, and we're going to talk about those as well. And just listen to how she got started, okay?
You have a company called Aura.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you guys do?
So we're all about data-driven healing. Our goal is to use technology to scale affordable, high-quality treatment services.
How did you start doing this? What got you into this in the first place?
Our father, growing up, was very abusive to my sisters and I. And my mom left when I was about 5 years old, and my sisters were around 3 years old. And I remembered everything, absolutely everything. So growing up, there was nothing that my mom could do to make me feel better. I was a miserable child and very angry all the time. And dealing with all of that throughout my life and learning how to cope is what initially made me want to go into mental health.
Interesting, right? Didn't I tell you, typically people, go into certain fields because it's, some type of experience, something, right? And for me, I could tell you personally, I went into the field because I was a juvie kid, right? I got into a lot of trouble when I was a kid, and a lot of trauma in my own life, right? So a lot of us kind of go into this that way. And so she speaks on it very briefly. And shout out to Miss BJ's mom in here. Her name is Amber. Shout out to you, Miss Amber. Thank you for stopping by. Um, this was interesting. I said, all right, okay. So I guess I get a little peek into who Lima is and her life and her driver motivation.
So what do you think causes these problems? Why do you think this exists in our society?
Yeah, so it's not about a housing issue. It initially started with abolishing slavery and trying to get cheap labor. And that's when we began to try to fill our prison systems.
I have to stop right there. She's being asked why, like, what made you start this company? What is the issue? And her answer is so, I was like, what is she talking about? And it sounded so familiar to me when she answered this question. Let me go back a little bit, okay? Hold up.
Made me want to go into mental health.
So what do you think causes these problems? Why do you think this exists in our society?
Why do you think, what do you think causes this problems? And why do you think this exists in our society? That's the question. Look at how she answers.
Yeah, so it's not about a housing issue. It initially started with abolishing slavery and trying to get cheap labor. And that's when we began to try to fill our prison systems.
That is the most awkward answer to that question. So I said, where have I heard this before? Where have I heard this before? It's called the deinstitutionalization theory. Thank you, Matt, for being a member for 5 months. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Shout out to you, Matt. Thank you. Let me show you guys an article. Okay, and this is from the Atlantic. This was written by Alyssa Roth, and she's the writer of the Insane American Clinical Treatment of the Mental Illness. And I really like how she broke this definition or this theory down a little bit. This is total textbook. When I heard her speak that way, I said, where have I heard this before? Okay. And I've linked this article in the description box so you guys can actually read a little bit more of deinstitutionalization. All right. So it's often used as like an explanation, like a blanket explanation into why we have all these problems in the mental health system, why we have so many people going into prisons, why, right? So let me read this. One popular explanation blames deinstitutionalization, the emptying of state psychiatric hospitals that began in the 1950s when the hospitals were shut down. The story goes that patients were discharged with no place to get psychiatric care. They end up on the streets, eventually committing crimes that got them arrested. As a result, jails, prisons essentially became the new asylums. It's an idea with roots in theory developed in the 1930s by a British psychiatrist, Linnell Penrose, who argued that there was an inverse relationship between the number of people held in prisons and those in asylums. Today, the Penrose hypothesis is largely regarded by scholars and historians as an oversimplification of the problem, yet variations of it are regularly repeated in the media. The truth is far more complicated, and that is fact, right? Far more complicated. We come from different environments, different cultures, different, life experiences. What Lima's trauma is not my trauma. I didn't experience, like she said, an abusive father. I didn't experience that, right? My trauma was a little bit more different. Hers is different. So this over explaining or a blanket statement to say it started because of this type of movement. What did she say? The abolishment of slavery and all this other stuff. I said that is such a very disconnected textbook answer, friend. Like I wouldn't have expected that, you know. But hey, I don't know. Maybe that's how she prepared for this interview. I don't know.
And we closed mental health facilities to open up more prisons. A lot of the funding cuts ended up, being taken out of mental health. And so that's why you see so many people on the streets with mental health issues. Another problem is that when you look at the numbers of people who are imprisoned, roughly about 60% of them are in there for substance use related charges.
Interesting.
And roughly about the same amount, 60%, also have diagnosed mental health conditions.
Who are you quoting? Where are your sites? Where are you citing your sources of these stats? Because let me tell you, I went and I Googled searched some of the just very, very much trying to get her stats, and I couldn't really, the closest I could pull up to what she's even giving stat wise was what happened in Las Vegas when patients were dumped, right? And I had talked about that at some point. The problem that I have with how she's making this blanket statement of deinstitutionalization, it's almost like she's modeling this to what her treatment and or services look like. Put a blanket over something like schizophrenia and put a band-aid, treat the symptoms but not the disease. And that, my friend, that is very concerning, right? Something like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, those disorders, right? They require, this is a lifelong, ongoing thing that someone is going to deal for the rest of their life. One medication, 2, 3, 4, like and it's crazy because sometimes when people are being treated for these illnesses, it's a walking experiment. You're experimenting. You're going to a psychiatrist, a doctor's giving you this medicine, go on this for so many months, and they're logging it on, go on that, go on this, and I get it. Very much agree with that. The problem is that sometimes people don't follow up with the maintenance of that, or the follow-up of that, or maybe they don't every so often. People every 90 days, every 6 months, people need to really sit down and have their medication reevaluated to determine, am I really on the right meds? Right? I'll give you guys an example. I don't have schizophrenia. I don't have these, I have ADHD, severe ADHD. And when I started, I don't take medication anymore, but when I started taking medication, I felt like a walking guinea pig. You know what I'm saying? I really did. And we were trying this medicine and that medicine and this dosage and that much dosage. And I felt like I wasn't going to find the right. And then there's times where your body goes into this mode where the medication's not working anymore, right? Or you need more maintenance to the medication, or some evaluation. But if you have these other factors like substance abuse, this dual diagnosis, or other things going on that are at play, say you want your medication and you can't afford it. So you deal with stress by drinking or something else. Yeah, we have an issue. But there is no blanket to fix this. There's no blanket. We can't put this type of theory and say that this is going to fix this. This virtual reality is going to fix schizophrenia, right? It's a little bit more complex than that, but hey.
With about 20% having severe illnesses like schizophrenia. So it's all about, right now, our system is about punishment over treatment and really monetizing that labor. And they're taking all of the funding away from mental health services and putting.
Who's taking the funding? Let me tell you something. When I did contracts for a department, we would have these providers. I would consider her a provider, even though it doesn't sound like Medicaid. You know what I'm saying? A provider, and anybody can be a provider. Somebody that provides mentorship is a provider, right? Whatever it may be. Comorbidity. Thank you so much for putting that out there. If she's coming over here to my office and she's trying to sell me a contract and say, listen, I can do this. This is what I charge. This is what it looks like. You pay me $400 an hour to see this amount of clients at this time. This is what it looks like. My questions to her, and she's given me all of this research. Who are your sources, love? Who are you citing? Who told you about treatment over incarceration? Where did you get that from? It's an ideal model. It truly is. But it's not a new concept. It's not a new concept. Don't let these people, and I've said it before, don't let them sell you a Pinto when you're trying to buy a Camaro. It's not a new concept. Just saying.
Putting it into other resources, which is completely damaging our society. And so if we put more services, more funding behind mental health services, we wouldn't have such a horrific mental health and homeless situation happening in our country.
So what you're suggesting is the appropriate response is more treatment for the mental health issues.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's all about treatment over punishment and really learning how to help people.
What got you into this field? I mean, your history with your family sounds like.
Yeah. So like I said, I initially didn't remember, my sisters didn't remember any of the trauma, but I had I remembered everything. And throughout my childhood and throughout my teenage years, I just got mixed up with the wrong crowd. And my sisters were the poster children for the perfect child. They were identical twins. They were athletes. They had straight A's. They had no recollection of the trauma. And then roughly within their mid-20s, they began to hear voices. And they didn't know what was going on. But because of the mental health stigma, they didn't come to my mom or myself. They kept it a secret, but they did do the right thing and they sought professional help. And so the doctors, of course, had absolutely no tools to treat them. They're mental health therapists. So they go and they ask them, how are you feeling? And then they started prescribing them cocktails of medications and drugs. And so at that time, my sisters had a very successful YouTube channel. Their career was on the up and rising. And once they started to seek treatment is when it all went downhill from there. So they began, at the beginning, they were prescribed antipsychotics, misdiagnosed for about 3 years. They were told that they were schizophrenic, which is not the case. And it's the way that we treat mental health services right now is the equivalent of me telling you, Mark, my leg hurts, I think it's broken. And then you ask me, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad is the pain? And I look at you and I tell you, maybe it's a 7. And so then you tell me, oh, it's probably not broken, it's probably fractured, take this medication, and if it gets worse, then come back and we'll put a cast on it.
You know, here, I think you're gonna be surprised with my answer. There is a point to be made here. In our country, there is an issue where we see mental health, behavioral health separate from like the physical health, where really we need to start treating them together. I do agree with that. I do feel like that there's an issue that we have right there where it's like, your depression can also affect how you feel physically, right? There's a disconnection there. Very much so. I don't disagree with that. But um I also feel like I'm not getting the sources from her for her to even tell me where are you getting this information from. She's speaking on her own experience, and that's absolutely fine. But ethically, for those that have worked in the mental health field, I can't use my mental health experience, although it can be a driver for me to make life decisions. I can't use that to apply it to everybody else. You know what I'm saying? You can't. She can't do that to me. And even with her sisters. So it's off. It's a bit off. Not everybody's the same. Absolutely not.
That's basically what we do to your brain. We're playing Russian roulette with your brain. Every time we prescribe you medications, we're slightly changing the chemicals in the brain when we really don't know what the issue is. And so after 3.5 years, my sisters were finally properly diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, which is extremely dangerous to treat with antipsychotics. Because in that 3-year period, the antipsychotics were not working, the doctors were giving them cocktails of antipsychotics, benzo, so Klonopin and Xanax. And eventually, because the Klonopin destroys the reward receptors, somebody prescribed them Suboxone, which is a synthetic opioid, and they ended up developing a full-blown opioid and benzo addiction that's completely destroyed our family.
That's a very much unfortunate thing. Now, it's my understanding. Here's the problem that I have with a little bit of our argument. When I was looking into the virtual stuff, it sounds like it's in conjunction with therapy, right? Or other medication. So you're adding this cocktail, this Russian roulette situation to a person who has X amount of diagnoses, right? And they're taking all this medication, right? And then you're putting them in this virtual reality thing. Is it separate? Is the virtual reality separate from the medication, or is it in conjunction? Because even in this interview, when she's talking, I'm really, really, really confused about how that plays into like the virtual stuff. How does that play into her medication? If somebody's taking medication and they've been taking it for years, right? And as she says, this is Russian roulette. They're being given all this medication. And I put them in a virtual reality type of treatment, okay? With medication, is that not also a Russian roulette situation? Because there's not enough research. I told you guys last time we went live, the American Association of Psychology, okay, the APA, yeah, the APA, just have to make sure I don't mix the words up. They did research in 2018. There was an article posted, and we haven't really, really looked into that. There hasn't been enough like scholarly research, 10 years of research to say, yes, somebody found relief with their symptoms. This is not a cure. Just like medication is not a cure. We're just treating symptoms. That's all it is. Somebody found relief by using this virtual reality Super Nintendo thing and put it in their eyes along with their medication, along with their lithium, along with their whatever, Suboxone. They found it. They fixed it. Got it. Isn't that Russian roulette too? Just a thought. I don't know. Just a thought.
So, but initially, the cycle is that they go to treatment for 30 days because that's what insurance will cover. The first approximately 10 days is horrible because you're just detoxing your body. After that, when the drugs are completely out of your system and they're trying to treat you with therapy, for about 2 weeks, your brain, essentially medications are like putting your brain in a wheelchair. So if I put you in a wheelchair for 3 years, and then I ask you to stand up, you're not going to be able to walk, nonetheless be able to even stand on your legs. And so if you've been taking meds or self-medicating or very dependent on different types of medications, and then they're taken away from you when you've detoxed, your brain doesn't know how to manually produce the chemicals on its own. It's very dependent and has been essentially crippled by this medication. So during that detox period, as soon as your body is completely cleansed of those chemicals, it doesn't know how to produce it on its own, and it's very much depleted. So you just feel awful all the time. And a lot of times, those people need to sit in that awful feeling, and it's too overwhelming for them to do so. And so initially, after detox, the following about 2 weeks is the brain learning how to function without that medication. So you are just hating life. Therapy's not getting through to you. Nothing's really making sense. You just want to leave. And then
it's almost like she's speaking from personal experience, right? Because she's not quoting any sources. She's saying, like, did she live this through her sisters, through herself? Right? Absolutely, Lotus Flower, absolutely. But is she speaking from experience, or what exactly? I mean, could we one size fits all? I wish, but it doesn't happen that way, right? I don't know.
Your brain is now starting to produce its own chemicals and function on its own. You're learning how to stand up, let's say, right? All over again, that physical therapy is starting to have an effect. So the last week of treatment, the last week of that 30 days, you're starting to benefit, and you're starting to seem like you're getting better, and then you're immediately released because insurance won't cover continued care. The reason for that is because it costs about $45,000 per month for somebody to get treatment in a residential facility. That doesn't include the initial hospitalization, the detox period, and all of the medications and everything else that goes into that.
Yeah, residential, I will give you that. Residential treatment is very expensive. I've worked in 3 different ones. They're expensive. You know what I'm saying? They're very expensive. But one of the things that she is missing out here, and she fails to kind of talk about, is she doesn't talk about treatment plans. She doesn't talk about like the maintenance of things. It's a little bit more complicated than this. Yeah, so something seems off. It seems very, when she speaks on this, by experience. It's basically it. It does. It's very expensive. Very expensive to be in a treatment center. Sometimes Medicaid doesn't cover, it might cover some. Sometimes if they're court order, then you have to find who can pay for it. You know, it's such a complex system. Um, and not a very easy one to understand, you know?
And it's very expensive, but the relapse rate is 90%. So with a 10% success rate, the insurance companies are saying we're not going to fund 45, 45, 45 when you have such a high relapse rate. The clinics, it's a catch-22 because the clinics are initially saying, well, on average, most patients have been self-medicating or initially addicted or harming themselves for 15 years or more. They've been taking these matters into their own hands. And you can't expect us to change 15 years of a behavior pattern in only 30 days and then expect it to last. And so with my sister's case, they've been to over 60 treatment centers, and the story is always the same. It's 30 days of treatment. They leave. There's no door-to-door There's no door-to-door care. There's such a high demand for these services that there's not enough doctors to treat the number of patients that needs help, especially since the opioid epidemic. There's been a 600% increase in the number of patients trying to admit themselves into treatment. So there's a nationwide shortage of beds and doctors and staff and support and help. And so they leave the 30-day treatment. They feel suddenly like they're on their own. A lot of these people, as you know, have this story that they tell themselves that nobody cares about me. I'm by myself. Nobody wants to help me. So when they're starting to get better in a facility and then they find themselves abandoned again, then they just feel like
whose story is she telling? I'm sorry, I'm just letting her talk, and I'm just like, who are you? Whose story are you telling? Everybody's story? Your sister's story? Your story? Who is she talking about? Which case study is she talking about? Who has she seen this happen to? Is it just her sister? Whose story? Are you all lost? I'm lost. Whose story is she talking about? Who are the people that you are? Is everybody in Skid Row? Is that the population, the targeted population? Who? I'm lost. Who is she talking about? I was lost. But anyways, let me keep playing.
Completely alone with my illness or my addiction. And the only thing that they know, because the thing that makes them feel better, is an instant, immediate satisfaction, whether that be cutting, whether it be high-risk behaviors, being promiscuous, compulsive.
Being promiscuous, compulsive. Like, who are you talking about? Your sisters? This is what they presented? Or you? Who? It's a rundown, but it's also very rehearsed.
Caffeine consumption, shopping addiction like me, right? So there's so many different ways. And these are very common. These are what I call negative coping skills. So they're very common. But addiction is not just an...
This is what I call negative coping skills. Google search negative coping skills and see what comes up. It's what she calls it. Who is she referencing?
Addiction to drugs or alcohol. It's initially the inability to say no, right? So it's the inability to set those boundaries for yourself. And I notice that a lot of times you ask, I mean, I think every time you ask the people that you're interviewing, tell me about your childhood. It really does start in childhood because you need a healthy balance. So if someone comes from a place where there's too many boundaries, right, where the parents are very, very strict with them and they're, can be also abusive in how strict they are, that can be completely debilitating to a child growing into an adult. And the same thing can be with with too much freedom, where parents just allow you to do whatever you want. Children need healthy boundaries so that they can learn to say no and they can understand their self-worth. And you have to find that balance. But if you have parents that are too freeing and are too consumed with what they're personally involved in and they don't pay attention to the kids, or if you have parents that are too controlling, you have your boundaries completely screwed up.
What is she talking about? No medical. I'm lost. So I watched this like 4 times and I said, I'm so lost. Because part of it is I was trying to understand where she was getting her information from, where she was quoting things, where can I pull in order to really talk about this with you guys? I said, where are you getting your information from? Thank you. Where is she getting her? I don't know what she's talking about. Because a lot of this I can just find on Google. I just Googled negative coping mechanisms. She mentioned one of them is impulsive spending. I could have told you that. Thank you. Shout out to my social workers. As an LCSW, she's not talking like she commands expertise about human behavior and the social environment. And it almost seems like, and maybe you can let me know your thoughts on this. Doesn't it seem like it's by her, her own experience, her own trauma, right? And that's what I'm picking up. Shout out to my beautiful social workers and therapists and mental health professionals in the chat. Thank you guys. And medical professionals. Something's off. Something's off.
And so that's where it all starts, with not having proper boundaries in place, and becoming addicted to your own self-destruction. And a lot of times when we say treatment, people assume that going to therapy is, so Mark, tell me about how you're feeling. And then you just puke everything out on me. And then you leave and you feel great after your therapy session. That's really not how therapy works.
It's not, right?
Therapy starts when you step outside the door, right? So one of our therapists, her name is Alana, and she uses our technology. She works with veterans. So she always tells her veterans that therapy is all theory, and the work starts when you leave. The reason that she loves our technology is because she's able to track how the patients are doing. We use voice analysis, we use biofeedback, so you can actually see how a patient's feeling. I'm not just asking you, how bad is...
This is interesting. So she talks about, let me go back a little bit because this kind of caught my attention and I should have written a note about this. Give me one second.
Just puke everything out on me and then you leave and you feel great after your therapy session. That's really not how therapy works. Therapy starts when you step outside the door, right? So one of our therapists, her name is Alana, and she uses our technology. She works with veterans. So she always tells her veterans that therapy is all theory, and the work starts when you leave. The reason that she loves our technology is because she's able to track how the patients are doing. We use voice analysis, we use biofeedback.
Who is interpreting the biofeedback? Are they interpreting that requires a bit of interpretation, my understanding. Now, I'm not, listen, that's how I understand how biofeedback works. If you sign your loved one up to one of my conservatorships, there will be no more reckless spending. Right, Teresa. Excuse me, my voice went out. It's like sign up and secure. Right? The biofeedback, and thank you, therapy is not theory. It is a theoretical framework from which one concrete intervention occurs. Thank you for saying that. Biofeedback needs to be interpreted. Who's interpreting? So when she said that, I was like, well, who's doing that? Who's the professional? Are they just, and this is, the more I hear her talk, it kind of paints the picture of what the services are. The services are, she designs the model, and she seeks out therapists, professionals in a clinical setting to use that model for them, and then she collects whatever data for her services, right? For whatever is needed to collect the numbers. So is she the one applying it? Yet who's developing? And if a therapist is saying, yeah, I'm going to use your services, are they aware of who, like, are they qualified? Who developed this? And who gave the blessing oversight for this to be okay? Maybe there's a contract between those therapists and her, and that's why they're able to do this. Who are the board members? Are they former actors? Then we got a problem. Is there anybody with a PhD, in behavioral science or a master's of something that could help? And we have a problem. Who's helping her? Who's helping her? She is speaking about these things as she's a trained professional. So that tells, it's interesting because when I hear her speak, it's almost like she's probably been in some trainings or in conversations with therapists and whatnot. But if she hasn't really been hands-on and she's the one interpreting, who's interpreting the data? Because you need to be qualified to do that, right? Who's collecting it? Who's interpreting? What does it look like? What do the numbers say? If she's data driven, who's interpreting it, and making sure that the data and collecting the data doesn't harm the patient, the client, the environment. Those are just factors, just a couple factors that you consider, right? Just a thought. All right, let me hit play.
So you can actually see how a patient's feeling. I'm not just asking you, how bad is the pain, right? I give the doctors the tools to see. So if you tell me that, you're fine, and I look and I can see that you're not fine, addicts are master manipulators. They have it spot on how to trick you. And on top of that, my sisters are the best actresses. So
Sisters.
It's hard enough for me to read them. But being able to have tools that, when someone's gone to treatment, it hasn't helped, gone to treatment, it hasn't helped, gone to treatment, it hasn't helped, they initially give up on treatment and they feel like they know better. And especially when I go in to see a doctor and they ask me, how are you feeling? And I tell them I'm fine. And they're like, oh, that's good. Then I feel like I can't trust that doctor because they can't see behind the mask, so they can't help me. So if it's so easy for me to fool you, then you can't help me. And so that initially discredits a lot of the therapists or the therapy sessions. The ability to just be able to see how the patient's feeling. We also use virtual reality.
See, and that's concerning. See, Jules says that the licensed therapists are interpreting the data, right? Because that's the biofeedback's based on what they are seeing. Okay, so if the licensed therapist is doing it, right? Who's storing, there's a vested interest here. Who's storing it? What does success look like? How do they know that they've achieved what are these stories look? What is a success rate? Those are just questions that I have, right? What else are they doing with, where are they storing the data? What are they doing with this data? How is this data going to be interpreted in the future for other treatments? What does it look like when somebody relapse? Okay, just a thought. What if somebody needs more services following up? Just a thought. So if she's not a therapist, if she's not qualified to, or at least a mental health professional, license or something, if she's not qualified to read this data, how is she able to interpret it or store it or talk about it? Because right now she's not even talking about this data. She's talking about her sisters and her own trauma and where she's at and what she Google search.com and the research. That's what she's doing. And maybe some words from the therapist that was licensed that she talked to about some of the clients that she's working with. She's not working with the clients. I'm trying to understand how the clients play a role. Is she directly providing the services? Because then we have a problem too. I don't think Medicaid would ever approve something like this. I mean, they hardly want to approve any kind of mental health services, but something like this, they barely want to look into equine therapy, animal therapy, the other stuff that we still consider experimental. For them to look at this, it's a lot of questions. I have questions, Linda. I do.
So we can put patients in triggering environments. And, for example, we put a patient in a bar, or for our veterans, we put them in a war zone. We've learned a lot about their response to certain things. It just gives us a lot. It's all about having that vast richness of data to really be able to analyze a situation and steer the conversation in a path that it wouldn't have gone otherwise, just because there's so many walls around these people that they're just not willing to let someone in. So you kind of have to find a way to gain their trust and show them that you actually can help them and that you can see how they feel and it's not all in their head. Because especially with my sisters, there's been so many times where they've said, maybe DID isn't real, maybe nobody can help me, I'm just crazy. Because up until now, no one has been able to help them.
So your company really gives the therapist a window into what's really going on.
Exactly.
With the patient.
What does she mean by up until now? What does she mean by up until now? So is she using the services on her sister up until now? If you're a mental health professional, you would immediately notice the conflict right away, right? You'd be like, oh, dang, like conflict, red flags, ethics. Matt says, if she's a mental health pro, isn't this a HIPAA breach? It's interesting because I went into her website, her Gibbs, is that what it's called? The, what is it called? The Jevremovic Institute of Behavioral Brain and Science. And the first thing when I click on it, it said HIPAA compliant. It's got a little, I'll show it to you guys in a little bit, right? And I was looking at it, I said, dang, okay, like they immediately want people to know that they're HIPAA compliant, which is great. What is that? Are they storing data? Are they using data? Are they disclosing information? Like, how are they? I just have a lot of questions. So for her, I don't know how she. Well, I'd have to look into that a little bit more. Cassie, thank you for the $5. Nina has her own YouTube channel. Look, Amanda's last interview shows her rehab and Amanda how they could afford a place like that. Interesting. I'll definitely, Cassie, I'll check it out. Thank you for that. I don't know. This is a good question because I don't know if is she directly treating her sisters or is she using that it's confusing as to even when she made that statement, is she directly using like are the sisters directly using the technology and then she's sharing that data? Like there's a lot of ethical red flags there in general. Thank you so much for the 1999 KT social worker. Thank you so much, love. I'm just I don't even know where to start, if that makes sense, because I had to watch it like 3 times, 4 times to kind of like really understand where this interview, and I say it loosely because she's not really answering the questions. She's just Mark is kind of letting her talk.
Exactly. So initially it's kind of like
not just their words.
Absolutely. So think of it as like therapy and medication, right? You do need both, but you need medication in moderation, right? Not the way that we currently prescribe it, where it leads to addiction, but in dependency. You also need therapy. So right now our system relies purely on medication and very little on therapy. Therapy is just there, so we say we do it, but it's medication to sedate everybody and manage them. And the way that I initially describe to patients or colleagues is it's like a fire alarm, right? So when I have a really awful feeling, that means that, and it could even be a midlife crisis, whatever it is, doesn't even have to be an addiction, right? When I have a bad feeling, that bad feeling is actually really good. It's telling me that something's wrong, and you need to learn to sit in it and analyze it, initially track and unpack that feeling. So if there's a fire going off and you take medication, it's initially like me getting up, taking the batteries out of the fire alarm, and then going back to sleep. So I'm going back to sleep in a burning building, and the side effects are suicide, self-harm, just, they're all horrific, right? Because if you depend on that long enough, the building's going to burn down and you have no warning sign.
What building is she talking? I'm so lost. I'm lost. I need directions. That's what I'm saying. And then this is my biggest red flag is, and I think it's later on in the interview where she talks about evidence-based, evidence-informed. Those are for social workers specifically, and therapists and mental health, behavioral health professionals. Those are like trigger words, right? Because we know that, hey, there's a study that went behind it. So it's very generic and rehearsed as she's talking, like the burning building. Okay, who are you referencing? Yourself? Other studies, other patients, what you've seen, who you've treated, who you've talked to, your sisters, Bam, who are you, Amanda, who are you talking about? Who? It's not. Absolutely. I agree with you, Susie.
Therapy is about looking for where the fire is, right? And so that's what our goal is to scale treatment so that you can learn how to sit in these bad feelings.
Therapy is about finding out where the fire's at.
And that when you refer to that feeling, it's not, I feel awful, because I hear that from my sisters all the time. I feel awful, I feel awful. It's about being aware of your feelings. So is it sad? Is it fear? Is it anger? What is that feeling? And then let's analyze where it's coming from. And once you can identify what triggered that feeling, you can identify how to initially respond to it, or you can identify how to avoid certain things that end up leading to that feeling. And it's like a domino effect. But if you're constantly like, I feel awful, this is a bad feeling, let me take the batteries out of the fire alarm, then you're constantly quieting that feeling and you're not getting better.
It's a lot of false analogies that she's using, right? And we talk about, when we report true crime here, we talk about the false analogies that people give us, right? It's essentially the analogy. It's great when it's being used, but it doesn't necessarily deliver. Like there's more context to the middle of that analogy, and she's not really understanding. If she's describing cognitive behavioral therapy, she's not really going into the meat and potatoes. I hate to use that, okay, but the juice of it. She's only kind of skewing to, she's not really getting into it. A lot of oversimplification, right? And that's what really concerns me. Like I said, she sounds great for those that don't necessarily understand behavioral health. I'd be like, yeah, it just sounds like she's qualified. But for those that have been in the field, we know this lady is trying to sell you a Pinto when you're trying to buy a Camaro. And that's concerning. Just saying.
So if a therapist is speaking with a patient and there may be some shame or anxiety or something going on that they're masking or hiding, the therapist kind of has a window into it.
Absolutely. So they can see. We use evidence-based scales. So depending on what the patient is diagnosed with, right now our biggest focus is on depression. We are a very young company. It's a startup, and I started it on my own.
How many years has Aura been around?
It's been a year. It's been around for a year, but I've been doing the research for about 7 years. So it was registered last April. We managed to raise a small seed round. We have 19 clinics that are currently signed up with us. We have about 600 clinics that want to sign up with us, but
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Hold up. Did y'all catch that?
I feel awful. This is a bad feeling. Let me take the batteries out of the fire alarm. Then you're constantly quieting that feeling and you're not getting better.
So if a therapist is speaking with a patient and there may be some shame or anxiety or something going on that they're masking or hiding, the therapist kind of has a window into it.
Absolutely. So they can see. We use evidence-based scales. So depending on what the patient is,
who designed the evidence-based scale? Who designed it? But Mark Leda is not going to ask her that question because he's not in that field. That would be a question that we would ask. Who designed your evidence-based scale? What does it look like? What is it measuring? What does success look like? Those are questions that we would ask. That's that evidence, anything evidence-based, evidence-informed, those are trigger words for mental health professionals to be like, okay, well, what does that look like? Evidence-based scale of what? Who designed it? Does it have any type, I'm thinking California Clearinghouse, anything? No, that's child welfare, but other services. There's a clearinghouse for these things. Who designed that? You're going to use a scale for why? Let me keep playing.
Diagnosed with. Right now, our biggest focus is on depression. We are a very young company. It's a startup, and I started it on my own.
How many years has Aura been around?
It's been a year. It's been around for a year, but I've been doing the research for about 7 years. So it was registered last April. We managed to raise a small seed round. We have 19 clinics that are currently signed up with us. We have about 600 clinics that want to sign up with us, but we just don't have a big enough team to support them. And we don't have the tools to scale our technology right now.
But
so what we're working on is we're getting ready to open up our Series A with private investors next month. We've had some really good traction and a lot of really great.
But they have a lot of clinics that are interested, right? Isn't that what they said? Thank you. There would be a number. She's not disclosing that. Why isn't she talking about the scales? But they got like so many clinics that are interested, right? All right. We are going to finish reviewing that during the week. I wanted to, because there's more to go to. And I mean, y'all got me on my social work hat at this point. Shout out to you guys. And it had me thinking, and I'm still going to review it and everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a playlist of just breaking down a couple things that she is saying. And it's concerning, right? We definitely need to be concerned about characters like this. I'm sure that in her mind, she probably thinks that she's doing very well by her service. I'd like to think, but it's harmful, and we need to be able to call that out. And we have these private investors, because I don't think Medicaid is ever going to approve something like that personally. And I can see why the pushback from insurance companies would be happening. Something that hasn't even been tested or verified, or like there is no PhD backing to it, I would be very concerned. Shannon Lee says, MedFact, adding more trauma to PTSD veterans make the PTSD worse. This was proven years ago to do the multiple combat deployment and the results from them. Interesting. Okay, baby bunny. So I'm going to have to go, but we're going to create a playlist. Keep an eye out for that. You ready to go? Yeah? Okay. I have to go tend to baby bunny, you guys, but I will see you guys in the next one, and just wait for another review on this. All right. I will see you guys. Have a great one. Shout out to everybody in the chat, and thank you for joining me.